Thank you everyone for joining us this evening for our webinar on the Voice to Parliament. My name is Laurie-Anne Sharp and I'm the Federal Assistant Secretary of the Australian Nursing and Midwifery Federation. And with us tonight, I'm very excited to join us is Jennie Gordon and Cy Hodgman, who you'll be hearing a lot from more during this session. So I'd just like to start by acknowledging all the traditional owners on the lands on which we meet. For me, it's the Bunurong and the Wurundjeri people here in Melbourne, and I pay my respects to elders past, present and future and recognise their continuing connection to land, water and community. I also encourage people online to reflect on the land that they're dialing tonight as well. I'd like to also acknowledge that this week is a very significant week for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people as well as all Australians. It's National Reconciliation Week. And that date is from the 27th of May to the 3rd of June. And that encompasses National Sorry Day, which happened on the 26th of May. It's also as another significant milestone in the 1967 referendum was passed during this week. And that was one of the most unifying moments in Australia's history where we saw Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people included in the census vote. And it's also the week of the Mabo decision. So a very significant week for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. But tonight we're here to talk about the Voice to Parliament. Now, I know that you're all here because you want to find out more. And as nurses and midwives, you know, and who works in hospitals and community services, we see firsthand the disadvantage that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people face. And it's very critical that we're informed about the Voice to Parliament. And we're very lucky to have Jennie Gordon and Cy Hodgman, who are Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and ANMF members. Who are going to go through why we need a voice to Parliament and their own personal experience as well with Uluru Statement from the Heart. So we might just start. We're going to start with Jennie, and Jennie's also going to share some slides with us. So I'd just like to introduce Jennie Gordon, who is a proud Ngunnawal Goulburn woman and a registered nurse. Jennie Gordon is on a journey advocating for a yes vote referendum for a voice to Parliament. A general and mental health hospital trained registered nurse, Jennie has worked in general nursing and mental health, aged care and disability services, as well as OHS and corrections service roles and Aboriginal advocacy for almost 50 years. She has a degree in adult education and a master's in management, and her career in health has included the role of manager workforce planning in the Greater Southern New South Wales and director of workforce policy and planning at ACT Health. She recently started a 3-year term on the Southern New South Wales Local Health District Board. Jennie was one of the elected representatives from the ACT Dialogue for the Referendum Council to become a member of the ACT and Region delegation to the gathering on the 26th of May 2017 when the Uluru Statement of the Heart was written. Jennie is married, mother of 3 and grandmother of 5. She's a strong advocate for the broader community of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in her region. Over to you, Jennie. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Laurie-Anne, and it's lovely to see so many people online this evening. I've got some slides happening and the girls from Federal Office are going to be putting those slides up. But I'd just like to take a moment to reflect on who am I and where do I come from. So I'm a Ngunnawal woman, born and raised up on Goulburn in New South Wales. So Goulburn is the border between Gundungurra country from here to the north and Ngunnawal country from here to the south. And, you know, we're very good at saying there are no castles. We don't have lots of those things that you can go and visit in the European history tours, but I do, and this is one of my passions, are the trees. So the tree on the left slide here is a ring tree, which is being formed by the old people by twisting the branches around each other like so, binding them, and that becomes a signpost. That particular tree is only about 10 kilometres from my home. It's got 4 rings in it, and it's actually a signpost which was for the young men. It was on the boundary of the young men's ceremony circle, the lands. The middle tree is about 20 kilometres from my home, and I've got a picture of me where I stand to about here. I'm halfway up that scar. The scarring on that tree has been removed to make a gunya or a shelter, on very cold grounds around our area. This tree on the right is a tree where the old people have actually taken a stone, put the stone up into the tree, and bound the stone up there. Over the years, that stone has actually fallen out and come down, but the trees are still there and they're significant. They're very old trees, as is obvious. And this particular tree is a signpost that tells us there's a waterhole down the hill there that has a rock bottom in it, and that rock bottom is actually stops that waterhole from ever going dry. So if you happen to be walking along through that area, there's a signpost there which says, hey, there's a waterhole down here. You don't need to walk any further, just go down there. I use that because it's through our history and through knowing that knowledge of our history that we actually ended up moving on to many generations of people who have been sharing stories, sharing signposts, sharing the love of our country, to end up in a space where we came to the Uluru Statement. Next slide, please, ladies. I started nursing when I was 17, and these are the 17 targets from Closing the Gap, and I've deliberately used these highlighted to highlight the importance of all of these socio-economic issues for our people. So those that are circled in yellow are specifically health related and but can be shared with others. So, enjoying a long and healthy life, children are born healthy and strong, children thrive in their early years, social and emotional well-being and access to information. They're all things that we hope to actually have impact on. The blue ones are specifically for education, but they're also, if people are educated and come into the health services, working in any health system, then they're things that we can share across to our Aboriginal communities. The pink down here, families and households are safe, that's an everyone issue. Everyone, no matter what your what is your career, what is your place in life, it's a really important thing that you, as a registered nurse or a nurse working in health, ensure that families and households are safe, and hence we have reporting responsibilities. The green ones are related to our lands and heritage and waters, lands, waters, and etc. And then the four across the middle are quite negative, provided in a negative light, but it's important things for people to register and recognise. So they are the Closing the Gap strategies. That's the important part for this particular information to all nurses and health workers across Australia. Next slide. So with all of those things in mind, this is my nice pictures from Uluru. And so in March 2017, I was actually involved in the 13th dialogue for the Referendum Council, which was held in Canberra. Now, lots of people are actually saying out there in the world, there wasn't good consultation with the Aboriginal communities, but there was very good consultation. The Referendum Council actually went and spoke with thousands of Aboriginal people across 13 dialogues in Australia, and from each dialogue, the people who were there in the dialogues got to vote and choose who actually moved on to go to Uluru. So here's our flight going to Uluru. we all went down to Sydney and hopped onto this wonderful plane. The partition between first class and the rest of us was this Aboriginal flag, and it was just fabulous. This is us flying into Uluru on the top corner there. The bottom large group there, that's the Canberra and District group, -1, who had joined the walkout campaign. And then the other picture on the bottom there is actually a picture of Chris Burke and myself signing onto the Uluru Statement. So that was the culmination of 3 days of work to get to that point. Next slide. So there's the Uluru Statement from the heart, and if you look at it, the blue circled group there has 5 names plus Chris Burke at the bottom. So the 5 names are all in my handwriting, because the 4 top names, Auntie Annette and Auntie Beverly from down at Jarvis Bay, along with Jeffrey and Darren, they had to catch an earlier plane to go home. And so I just said to them, just write your names down. I'll pop your names onto the statement. And there they are, along with my name, Jennie Gordon Ngunnawal. So all of the people who were at Uluru actually got to sign on the document here. And the document was never, ever given to the government. And I think that's a really important part for people to understand. We never, ever gave this information, the actual original document, to the government. We just said, no, this is our gift to the Australian people. We want this to never go to the government. We want to maintain the ownership of it. And so it's our gift to the Australian people, so that we can actually ask the Australian people to walk with us on a journey of reconciliation. Hence, it still travels around the country today. And I saw it just 2 weeks ago, or 3 weeks ago, sorry, up in Hervey Bay. So next slide. Once we actually completed, after 3 days at Uluru, on that 3rd day, we actually made the decision. They read out the statement, which had been worked on overnight. And there was a core group of people who actually stayed back and worked on that statement overnight, which included quite a lot of the young people. In Aboriginal culture, we always make sure that the young people are actually included in quite a lot of this decision making, because our young people are our future. And we know very well that, at any time, some of the older people may not be there. And there's quite a lot of our older people who 6 years ago were there in that room, stood up and actually cheered. We reenacted this for the photo. But we actually stood up and cheered like that when it was read out, because we actually felt, yes, that's a unifying statement. We really liked it. And that was the statement we'd like to give to the people to take to the referendum. So, next slide. So here we are. These are just some pictures which happened there. There's a group here on the bottom left-hand side, as I'm looking at it. They are the main young people who were there over that period of 3 days, had been elected by their communities to be there. There's Auntie Jackie Huggins and myself in the top right-hand side. And there's the aunties who were actually sitting there doing the artwork around the statement. So the statement hadn't been printed on the document there at the time, but there's Uluru sitting in the background. I just love it. And so I've put it together with the sign there that says, we gifted this to the people of Australia to walk with us in a journey of reconciliation. So, not very long after, when the Prime Minister of the day said, would they reject the Uluru Statement, I actually had a little chuckle to myself, as did many of us. And we just said, well, it's not yours to reject. It's up to the people. So it's taken quite a long time to get to this stage. So, next slide. So there were 250 of us in that room, and plus the previous referendum council staff who were there on the day. There were a walkout group from Uluru, which was only 5 delegates, plus a group who had been, they'd all driven up to Uluru and had been invited into the room, but weren't there as delegates. And from that date, which is 6 years ago now, we've actually been working on progressing the statement and getting it all over the country and taking the words and the vision to the people of Australia. So this is a vision for the referendum, a voice for our people. And I've just popped up the top there. There's a picture of my boots, which I took there on the day. And every day I was there, my boots looked like that. And the red dust from the heart gets into your boots and into your soul and into your heart. The picture on the bottom there is a picture from Harvey Bay, which we met up there. I was there for a conference and just met up with my friend Veronica, and she was at a panel on the evening, and that panel was talking to a group of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in Harvey Bay, doing exactly what we're doing with you tonight as nurses, talking to the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander community in that space about what are the choices and what else. Do you vote yes or no? And could we have some informed choices about, making, helping you to make your decision? So as it happened, there were 5 of us in the room that night who were all 6 years older, but we're all in that room with the Uluru Statement from the Heart. So with that in mind, we really do appreciate the fact that, as nurses, you're all here and you're listening to my conversation about being part of the journey. For that whole 6 years, I've been part of the journey on a daily basis right now. I'm actually talking with other groups. But even today, I actually met with a group of nurses in Goulburn, nurses and community health workers in Goulburn in New South Wales. And the topic of discussion was exactly this. Should I vote yes? Should I vote no? There's so many things out there. What do you think I should do? And so, I just use my journey and sharing my journey as part of the reason. Our people deserve a voice, but we're not actually voting on a voice at this point in time. We're voting on recognising our people in the referendum, in the Constitution, and that's something that really does need to happen when we are now, in the 200 odd years after colonisation in our country. Our people who have been here for 60,000 years deserve to have a voice marked into the Constitution so that it can't be removed by the government of the day. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jenny, for that presentation. And I couldn't agree with you more. The Uluru Statement from the Heart is certainly a gift. It's one that I hold proudly in centrepiece in my office that was actually given to me by some work colleagues. Actually, it was just such a delight and wonderful surprise when I had that. And I encourage everyone to. It's such eloquent words, such meaningful words. And if you get the chance, I really encourage participants to read it. I did forget to mention a couple of things just before I introduce Sai. Please feel free to pop any questions, any at all really, in the Q&A. We do have Christy and Elizabeth sort of at the back of the house fielding all the questions, and if we get an opportunity at the end, would be really good to have the conversation. So there is no silly question, so please feel free to put that in the chat. We are also giving out 10 free t-shirts tonight, and we'll draw them in a random raffle of names during this week and contact you via email to get your address to send them out. And we'll also be giving away copies of the Voice to Parliament, the book I have here in my hand by Thomas Mayo and Kerry O'Brien, which is a very good read and very informative. So look out for the email. Now I have the great pleasure of introducing Sai Hodgman. Sai Hodgman is a Chorwulway Palawa nurse, and he has nursing experience in public, private, aged care, disability and community-controlled health settings, and across a number of different specialty areas. Sai is a former board member of the Congress of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Nurses and Midwives, CATSNM, and he sits on the editorial board of the Australian Journal of Advanced Nursing and is the president of a local Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander community-controlled sporting association in Brisbane's northern suburbs. Working as the First Nations Strategy, Policy and Research Officer for the Queensland Nurses and Midwives Union, the QNMU, he's been heavily involved in the conversation and research regarding the referendum since September last year. In 2023, he's visited over 70 different hospitals, health services and aged care facilities across Queensland to engage in hundreds of conversations to share information amongst QNMU members and the broader health community. I'd like to know how many kilometres you did, Sai, in all of that. These health services expand from Thargomindah in remote southwest Queensland through to Emerald and Roma in central Queensland and all the way up to Thursday Island in the Torres Strait. So please welcome me in introducing Sai Hodgman. Over to you, Sai.
Thanks, Lorianne. To answer your question, I think 1 week, I think my record was 3,100 kilometres in a week. I think I spent 37 or 38 hours in the car, as well as the 4 hours a day of consultations and face-to-faces. So
well done.
That was a big trip. So yeah, thank you very much. I've also got something that I'll be speaking to as well if the head office wants to pop it up, and just pop across to the next slide and we'll get started. So I'll be talking a little bit more about the Voice to Parliament, the referendum and the campaign, and it's slightly different to how we are having this conversation with members out and about in face-to-face. Which I tend to like to hold in a much more sort of yarn-based sort of conversation. So please, anyone else who has the ability to interrupt me, just tell me if I'm waffling, because I'm not a big fan of just talking ad nauseum. I love having yarns instead. What I will do is let you know how I open a lot of those yarns is by telling members what I'm hoping to get out of having that conversation with them. And the top one is to stay informed and to seek information. And a key component of that is actually knowing where to seek information and seeking the right information. Having key sources of truth is a really vital part of staying informed in this campaign, and that's why we at the QNMU actually have on our website, and I know that the ANMF is looking at doing something similar. Having a page that's dedicated to making sure that our members can make informed decisions and go for information. And again, no question is too silly. If you want to ask a question of the union, something that you don't feel like we're providing information on our websites, please reach out and we will endeavour to make sure that we've got an evidence-based solution to that. The other thing is to be aware of disinformation and to also inoculate others against disinformation. And a really good example of that, I might cover in my disinformation FAQs and information FAQs. But the biggest piece of disinformation that's out there at the moment is that there's actually not enough information. There's plenty of information out there. You just need to know where to go to look for it. And again, have that take some. At the risk of sounding very much like the educator in me, take the initiative to look it up and do some research. We're asking for our members to be brave and start the conversation and have conversations. We understand that there is discomfort in having conversations, and that bringing up an issue that seems to be divisive can be a scary thing, but it is worth remembering that this being Reconciliation Week as well, but the 1967 referendum was the single most unifying democratic moment in Australian history. And we have the potential to beat that unifying moment in Australian history. It's only divisive if people say no. There's an invitation that's been extended by Jennie there and the other mob that were there at Uluru. And I, for one, want to say yes to that invitation. I know that it's been extended on behalf of people in my mob too. So No, I do just want to say that this has the opportunity to be a unifying moment in Australian history. And to remain strengths-based. And there's a little caveat underneath that, and that is that obviously having these yarns does have the potential to do harm. And I don't want to talk about things in a negative way, but I do just want to call out the elephant in the room. We all remember what happened with the plebiscite for equal marriage and marriage equality. And we saw what happened not just to our LGBTQI community, but also to our allies in that space as well, who were really quite disappointed in the process and the dialogue that was going on around that. So just remember that the words that we use and the getting involved in this conflict, even if you're on, no matter which side of the debate you're on, does have the potential to cause harm. So just make sure that we're doing it in a strengths-based way. Moving on to the next slide, if you don't mind. So I guess the big question that we get asked is, why is this nursing business? And that's a fair question to ask why we're getting involved in it as a QNMU and the ANMF. And the main reason is it impacts on the social determinants of health, as I said, Jenny touched on a little bit earlier on, so I don't want to go over too much of that, but this has the potential to seriously impact on our social determinants of health. We are an evidence-based profession, and what I'm asking our members to do is apply that same evidence-based lens and practice that we would expect of each and every one of you here today to apply to their professional standards. We're asking you to apply that same level of evidence-based research to your participation in the democratic process. It is part of our identity as a profession to research and to be informed. It is part of our expectations, and we have agreed to it as part of our registration to be evidence-based in the things that we do and the way that we impact on the health of others. This will impact on the health of others, and therefore I believe it's our professional obligation to apply that same research lens to our participation in particularly any democratic process that has the potential to impact on the health of any other human being. And look no further than your very own CPD to understand that this is nursing business, because we're going to send you out some reflection questions after this. And if you demonstrate that you can answer those and reflect and fill out those reflection questions, you can log this as CPD for the very reason that this is nursing business. So yeah, I think that's a fairly solid evidence right there that that APRA is going to consider this as a reflective practice exercise. Over to the next slide, where we can talk about why the ANMF and QNMU are getting involved in it, because it's also union business. We've obviously always stood on the side of social justice. I don't think that we need to go too much into this. Like, I mean, we stand on the side of people who are the little guy, right? We're the people that stand up for the little guy. I actually really don't like using the analogy, but it's just perfect because it's in Planet of the Apes. You know, he gets a little stick and he goes, you know, alone weak, and he gets a whole bunch of sticks and together strong. And that's what the union's all about. We stand up for people who will break under the pressure of not having people back us. And unfortunately, that stands for frontline workers more often than not, and also the minority groups. Unions were on the side of the equal marriage and LGBTQI rights. Unions have historically been on the side of refugee rights, frontline workers, and obviously the unions were a massive push up here in Queensland, I know, for voluntary assisted dying bills that's passed only fairly recently. When I say fairly recently, in last year, I think it was, maybe possibly the end of the year before that. And I remember that unions came out very strong. We were all part of that. So again, a big part of the conversation, I'll go into conversation starters a little bit later, but what I like to say is, particularly when it comes to our union allies, is that, do you agree that we should fight for nurses and midwives to be involved in consultation regarding policies, laws, and legislations that impact the healthcare sector, and in particular nurses and midwives. And almost every single nurse will say, well, yeah, of course, nurses should be asked about things that impact on nurses and midwives. And do you think teachers should be asked for input and consultation on things that impact on the education sector? And the answer is almost always, or in fact, it's always been yes. And so again, do you think that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people should have a voice then in matters that impact on them? And the answer, unfortunately, is still a bit 50-50. But I think if you follow that logic chain, I think that we could all agree that it should be a resounding yes. So if we skip through to the next slide, that brings us to the actual question itself, which I believe we should all know these questions coming into the actual referendum. We should know these back to front. We should know exactly what we're voting for. And again, I want to reiterate that to say I don't actually know what I'm voting for. It's all written there. We're not voting for the subordinate legislation, which I'll talk more on in a second. But there's three parts. You're not answering yes, yes, and yes to the three different parts of this question. You're answering yes once to all three parts of this. I think all three of them are a no-brainer, but then again, I might be a little bit biased. But I do want to walk you through my rationale. The first part is that there shall be a body to be called the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Voice. Well, if you want to actually have a body that does anything, it needs to be created. So it's a no-brainer. It needs to exist in order to have any sort of authority or responsibility. So its existence is just point one. Point number two is that the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Voice may make representations to Parliament and the executive government on matters relating to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. Again, it's the argument that I was discussing with you before about union business, and again, being a strong, passionate unionist, and also a strong, passionate nurse who believes in nursing consultation regarding matters that impact on healthcare. I think that you translate this very directly across to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. Yes, I believe that the subject matter experts and the people that are actually going to be directly impacted by decisions that are made should probably be consulted. I think that that's a very common sense statement to make. And the third is that the Parliament shall, subject to the Constitution, have power to make laws with respect to the composition, functions, powers and procedures of the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Voice. And so this basically is then saying, well, do I trust the people that we as Australia have elected to represent us to make laws about essentially how they're going to listen to this voice and what it's going to look like? At the end of the day, the laws regarding the powers, composition, functions and procedures of the voice are likely to change over the next 200-300 years, whereas the Constitution is not. So what we're not going to do is vote or go into too much detail on what the powers and procedures and functions of the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Voice look like, because that's not what we're voting on, and that's going to change. The Australian people don't vote on how any other body is composed or how any other body runs. So the concept of Australian people voting on the minutiae of a detail of a particular government body, why start with an Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander body? We'll skip on to the next one if you don't mind. So again, as I mentioned before, with connecting with the campaign, I use those first two questions to connect with people when I talk to them and try to understand and reframe it away from the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander sort of lens a little bit more to start off with, and focus it more on the union lens and how we campaign as frontline workers. It's also an interesting conversation starter to ask people if they're aware that we're, as Australia, the only British colonised country on the planet that doesn't have a mechanism for First Nations people to consult with the government directly. The only one on the planet. Every other British colonised country on the planet has a treaty or separate parliaments or separate bodies that act as a conduit between First Nations people and their governments. The fact that we're behind America on this is quite frankly, alarming, even South Africa. And the other thing is, again, keeping in mind the strengths-based lens that I've asked you to consider beforehand is the, have you heard about the fantastic evidence to support outcomes for self-determination in First Nations people's healthcare? Things like the BIOC, Birthing in Our Community, Lancet's come out with an article showing that the preterm birth rates for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women is better than non-Indigenous women who engage in the BIOC model, and also costs $4,000 less than people with with similar socioeconomic burdens of health. So again, showing that self-determination saves money and has better outcomes. So next slide, please. Again, I told you I wasn't going to go into too much detail, and I won't, but this is essentially what the body's going to look like, a federal body. And this is what it's been proposed as. Again, these are all subject to change, but it's pretty likely that this is what the first iteration of this is going to look like, keeping in mind that over the next 100 years, there's going to be lots of change. But for at least for the next 3 years, this might be what it looks like. And there's going to be 35 at the moment, 35 regional bodies that are going to feed into this as well. And they're all going to be comprised of probably dozens of their own delegates spread out across those 35 regions. So again, I won't waste too much time on this, and I know we are running a little bit behind time, so we might skip ahead. Again, talking about what the voice won't do, the main thing is that there is no power to veto. There is no ceding sovereignty of Australia, nor is there ceding sovereignty of First Nations people. 97% non-Indigenous people in this country cannot vote on the sovereignty of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. It's just like saying that Australian people can vote on the sovereignty of China or India. We can't vote on the sovereignty of people from other nations, and non-Indigenous people can't vote on ours. It also won't usurp the existing organisations that exist out there. They're still going to have the same voice that they've always had, land councils and other things like that. There is a lot of evidence, publications, should I say, regarding the principles of the voice that have been released, and they're actually also on our website, and I highly recommend you read those as well. Next one. Sorry, I just realized that I did tell you to warn me if I'm waffling. And we did have a yarn before about the fact that there is a lot of discomfort in having these conversations. And we do want to be mindful of the fact that some of these conversations, when you are having them, can be uncomfortable and they can inspire discomfort. But this is actually, I want to invite you to consider it as an opportunity to have a little bit of empathy with First Nations people and members. If you shift your lens to making sure you try to speak from the perspective of a First Nations person, and you experience that pushback and that level of discomfort when you're having those conversations, imagine what it's like being an Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander person who lives that experience every day, even for something as simple as not wanting to be followed around at the shops. And I think it's also really important to recognize false assumptions in a number of racist arguments. And I can go into that in more detail, but I'm just afraid that I've waffled right up to this point. But I highly encourage every single person in this to get in touch with me for a yarn and any frequently asked questions or, yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Si. That was really informative presentation, and thank you to Jenny. Now we do have 4 or 5 minutes left, so I'm encouraging people just to put a couple of questions in the chat. And before we do that, I just wanted to quickly go over some of the basics of a referendum, because some people don't know what a referendum is. We haven't had one since 1999. So basically, a referendum is a vote, and it's the only way that you can change the Australian Constitution. It's run very much like an election. We've had 44 of them in the history, in the last 122 years history of the Constitution, and only 8 of them have been successful, with the 1967 one being a resounding success and a very high majority in the consensus for to get Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people counted in the census. But I also just wanted to let people know that for a referendum to be successful, it has to reach a double majority. So it has to be a majority across the country as well as a majority of the existing states. So we will need 4 of the 6 states to have a majority yes vote, plus a 50% across the country. Now, the territories vote just goes into the national vote. So that's how that works. It very much runs like exactly the same rules in an election. You know, you'll be asked to go to the polling booth. Everyone who's over 18, it's compulsory. You'll get your sausage. It'll be held somewhere in the middle of October to the end of November. That date hasn't been confirmed yet, but we're hoping that that will be announced in the coming weeks. So we do have some questions, and I'm just going to, Sai and Jennie, you happy just to take a couple? So just one that's come in. It's just what do you see? We've got 2. So what do you see will make it? How will the voice to Parliament make a difference for the everyday lives of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people? That's one, and then I'll give you the other one as well. And Alison has asked, she's worried. What will happen if there is a no, and what message that will give to the community? What will a no vote mean for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples?
Okay. So how it will impact on the everyday life of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people is that again, once it finally gets established, and you know, a yes vote won't mean a change tomorrow. It'll mean a change in a few years. That when policies are getting made, like similar to the Northern Territory intervention, let's use that as an example, where they rolled into communities with tanks and guns because the government decided something needed to be done about a comment that was made by a public figure on saying that there needs to be some sort of intervention in the Northern Territory. Invasive rape test kits were enforced on children throughout communities who had no business having those tests imposed on them. If the voice was there at that point in time, I think that, and there was a requirement for the government to consult and genuinely consult with that voice, I would have hoped at some point in the process, someone would have said, actually, that was a really genuinely bad idea, and convinced them not to do that. The Northern Territory intervention, I think everyone can see is a really bad idea. And in hindsight, everyone understands that was a really bad idea. But at the time, I have no idea why the government thought this is brilliant. And I think that in the real lives of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, we can see that that sort of stuff just hopefully won't happen again in future if this does get up.
I think, Sai, it's really important to talk about the previous voices that we've had. And, you know, this is why at Uluru, we actually asked for this voice to be embedded in the Constitution. So if you could talk to that, that would be really valuable. Thank you.
Yeah, I certainly can. So, I mean, ATSIC's a perfect example of that, right? So ATSIC had two arms. One was to be a voice to the senior executive government and parliament, and the other arm was program delivery. Now, I think the program delivery, this is not going to be delivering programs. This is just going to be the voice. And I think a lot of people, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, would agree that ATSIC did a fantastic job at actually representing their interests. We've seen time and time again that there have been, I think there's been about 5-6 different iterations of the voice in history that have all been dissolved by Liberal governments as soon as the Liberal governments come in. So I think we've seen that these voices actually do a fantastic job at representing communities and providing advice to the government when the government of the day is listening to that voice or obliged to consult with the voice or considers it a priority to consult with the voice. That's when we've actually seen big steps forward in Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander health outcomes and social determinant outcomes. That is when we've actually seen significant improvements. It's when the change of government happens and those voices get disbanded almost immediately upon the commencement of the new government that we see those steps backwards again. So Having it enshrined in the Constitution just essentially means, and the reason why it's been asked to be enshrined in the Constitution, and we're not just asking for a voice in general, is because they just immediately get disbanded as soon as the Liberal government comes in.
And by having it in the Constitution, it can't be disbanded. So whatever government of the day can come in and actually make changes to how it looks, but it cannot be disbanded. There will always be the capacity of Aboriginal people to have a voice to the government. I think the other day I was talking with Cy and just talking about, people keep asking, what will the voice look like? And I have no idea, but I do know that, I talk to people like an older woman, and I just say, like when you were considering being a parent, did you say, I won't have a baby until I know what that baby is going to look like? No, we don't do that. So.
Thanks, Jenny. And so I've just got to, if people can bear with just for another 2 minutes, I think there are some important questions,
yep.
If that's okay. I can answer Jane's one, why are there Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people against the voice? I mean, there has actually been a number of surveys that have been out there to suggest that over 80% of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people support a voice to Parliament. But we've got one from Kat, and this is to Cy, or Jenny and Cy. Power remains imbalanced and unchanged, and I guess this is a difficult position. How can it be different? We know that racism exists in society, and how can we assist our community? Just in the re-traumatization that this will bring, no doubt. I mean, I'm just, I'm very cognizant of, even Jenny and Cy having to tell your story every time, to be a big part of this campaign. We are asking a lot of our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander brothers and sisters in this campaign, but there's also, there's a lot of people that for whatever reasons can't be active, and we see that this potentially can cause re-traumatization. So what things can we do to assist those communities?
So the power imbalance does remain unchanged, but the reality is, by having the capacity to have a voice, at least the issues are actually raised and put into the public space. And I think by having the issues raised and put into a public space, then the broader community of Australia actually begins to actually see, acknowledge and understand some of the issues that are happening for our people. So that to me is a really important part of, how can we assist our community in the re-traumatizing it brings. All we can do is provide reassurance. I know, like on a regular basis, we're providing reassurance to say, yep, we understand that today is a really tough day. And there are tough days, like in my family, there are tough days because, I know that, my grandmother died because she wasn't allowed to actually go into a hospital at the time that she died. And that was in the 1930s. It is tough, but the reality is, by providing some reassurance along the way, that things will get better. And that's why, when we're talking about Aboriginal people and we acknowledge elders past, present and emerging, we do that because, by providing the reassurance for our younger ones, they grow into strong people for the future. So, yeah.
And I think I would add to that, obviously, the question sort of implies the fact that, this is not a silver bullet. It's not going to solve everything. And I don't think that we're selling this as something that is solving everything. This is a step in the right direction. To follow on what Jenny was saying, is that we're moving forward, and that reassurance is something that I hope that Mob are taking with them, that no, we understand that this is a very complex issue, and it's not going to be solved with one silver bullet, that this is a step towards the solution. It's not the solution. No single bill in Parliament, no single vote that the Australian people participate on is going to solve this problem. It is a very there are lots of problems, and they're all very complex.
Yeah, it's the beginning, not the end, isn't it, Si?
That's right. And the design principles specifically say in them, if you look them up, that transparency is a key element of it, and that socializes that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voices are going to be part of the debate and discussion regarding Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander issues from this point on.
I think too, Lorianne and Sky, just looking at Jane's question, that's a really important question. Why are there Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people against the voice? And I really think that we need to actually respond to that very clearly. Jane, like everybody, you know, every community group, there are people who don't agree with this as a way forward. I think, you know, like Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people come from a history of 260 odd nations or language nations across Australia. Some don't exist anymore, but lots of people actually say, you know, like, you cannot talk for me. And understanding that, you know, we now only have 8 states or you know, eight voting spaces is quite challenging for a lot of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. There's also quite a lot of lateral violence within Aboriginal communities. And so, you know, like people say, you know, I don't want to have Jennie Gordon talking on my behalf, or I don't want to have Cy talking on my behalf. But it's not because, you know, Jennie Gordon is a awful person. It's just that Jennie Gordon isn't from that particular community. So, you know, that's one of the things. I think one of our most famous people who's what is she? She's in the upper house. Anyway, was also part of the walkout group at Uluru. She wasn't there as a delegate, but she walked out anyway.
And that's the other thing as well, is that there different mob will have different reasons for not wanting to be, you know, not wanting to support this. A vast majority of that is probably going to be because they believe that what they're doing is good for their mob, and we don't. I don't want to ever talk about anyone who speaks against this in a disparaging way, particularly mob, because they usually, most of it's as a result of distrust. Some of it is because they enjoy being the voice within particular political parties and stuff as well. So, and there is some self-interest in there, but I genuinely feel as though a vast majority of people who are standing up against it, who are mob, are doing so for genuine reasons, and most of that is distrust.
Thank you, guys. Can we have just one more, because I think this is a really important one. I promise this will be the last one, but this is from an anonymous attendee. How do non-Indigenous Australians have discussions about the voice without taking the focus away from Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, or seem like we're talking on their behalf again historically?
I'm very happy to answer this one.
Yeah,
again, essentially, I think the best way to do it is by understanding that his deeply entrenched within the Australian Constitution and our democratic structures is this the fact that we have to ask to have a voice, and 97% non-Indigenous people are the ones who vote on whether or not we have a voice, means that you actually have a responsibility to discuss this, because we can't get basic consultation, the right to basic consultation, or even a seat at the table regarding decisions that are made about us without white people saying yes. And that's just, it's just part of our constitution. So I actually think that having that conversation needs to be considered, and that's what Reconciliation Week's all about, right? Reconciliation is about, it needs to be led by non-Indigenous people, and self-determination is led by Indigenous, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. And so that's how that goes. So I think if we take that lens of reconciliation being led by non-Indigenous people, because that's where the power is held, and understanding that that's where the power is, then that's how that sort of happens. Does that make sense? Yeah. You're talking about the white structures rather than Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, right?
Thank you, Si. I think, and thank you to all the participants. I think we'll wind it up. We have gone 15 minutes over, so I appreciate everyone's patience, but I think it was a really good discussion. I'd just like to, or like you all to join me in showing our appreciation for Jennie Gordon and Si Hodgman tonight. Thank you. It was a very informative presentation and some really great participation too from participants. Do look out for your email. We will be doing the draw for the t-shirts and the books this week, so we'll be in contact with those winners before the end of the week. And ANMF will also be running more webinars throughout the year in the lead up to the referendum. So we look forward to you sharing that with your colleagues and getting along to those to be informed. So thank you, everyone. Have a great night, and thanks very much for coming. Bye now.